Thanks, Insigne, and thanks for the invite to contribute to this discussion today. Um, First of all, I think we need to say that the thought that Israel wants to launch yet another massacre in Rafah after more than 4 months of a genocidal assault on the people of Gaza that has left 30,000, mostly women and children, dead, that has displaced 2 million people, and that has brought the entire population of Gaza to the brink of famine, demonstrates that this is a regime that is completely out of control, and that has no place in the civilized world. I think it demonstrates that this has nothing to do, and never did have anything to do, with so-called self-defense, but that Israel has used the October the 7th events as a pretext to accelerate and intensify a long-standing agenda of genocidal destruction of Palestinian society, and of the idea of the Palestinian nation. So I think it's important we emphasize that, and we reject completely the notion that the current horrific escalation of violence dates to October the 7th, but in fact is part of an ongoing campaign of ethnic cleansing that began in 1948, and that has seen decades, wave after wave, for decades of ethnic cleansing, of murderous occupation, of cruel and brutal apartheid, and of course of the 16-year-long siege of Gaza, which in and of itself was a crime against humanity. And I think we need to hold deeply complicit the regimes in the Western world and elsewhere, but in particular in the Western world, that have facilitated and supported Israel in its genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people. Quite simply, without US weapons and arms, British weapons and arms, German weapons and arms, the favored trade status that the European Union confers on Israel, they would not be able to carry on this genocide. And indeed, if the Western world had have imposed sanctions on this apartheid colonial regime when the Palestinian people were pleading with them to do so for many, many years before now, when international human rights organizations had pleaded again and again for the world to act against the war crimes and crimes of humanity that Israel was committing, we would not be facing this horrific situation. It is the impunity that Israel has been given, and the refusal of the world to recognize that Israel is not a normal state, but is a state that is built on apartheid colonialism and ongoing crimes against the Palestinian people. So I think that is important, because as horrific as this situation currently is for the Palestinian people, I do also think that Israel and its backers have been exposed, and in particular because of the sharp contrast in the standards and so-called standards of the Western world, which were revealed with their immediate move to sanction Putin, rightly, for his cruel and brutal and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine, but then the absolute failure to do anything to stop Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza has exposed in front of the eyes of the world these absolutely outrageous double standards, and demonstrated the complicity of the Western powers with the crimes that Israel is committing on an ongoing basis against the Palestinian people. But I think the key to force our governments to do more, to break their links with this colonialist and apartheid regime, is the movement of people on the streets that we are seeing. Here in Ireland, there has been constant mass mobilization since the commencement of Israel's assault. And I have to say, it has put massive pressure on the Irish government. In the first few weeks of Israel's assault, the Irish government were essentially echoing the talking points of Israel and its Western backers in justifying the so-called self-defense argument. But we've seen that Ireland, because of the huge extent of mobilization, the Irish government were then forced to call for a ceasefire. And now, more recently, they are at least beginning to articulate the demands of the mass movement on the streets that is demanding serious sanctions. So, for example, the Irish government in the last week has written to Ursula von der Leyen saying that the EU Mediterranean Association Agreement, which Europe has with Israel, should be reviewed. The Irish Foreign Minister has called Israel a rogue state. They are seriously talking about sanctions. Now, they're not doing it, but it shows that they're under massive pressure. And a huge issue that is now emerging in Ireland is that Ireland's national day, St. Patrick's Day on March the 17th, is a day when the Irish Prime Minister goes to Washington traditionally to give presents to the US president. And a massive debate has developed in Irish society saying that no Irish politician, no Irish Prime Minister, government representative should be seen shaking hands with or in any way fraternizing with a president like Biden, who has armed and supported and is deeply complicit with the Israeli genocide in Gaza. So again, we are mobilizing people on the streets around those demands, and the government is under very, very serious pressure. Last point I would make is at the big demonstration at the weekend, one of the people that we put on the platform was one of the workers in a shops called Dunn Stores, which is a retail supermarket network, who went on strike in the mid-1980s for 2 years because they refused to handle South African goods. And this forced the Irish government in the 1980s to be the first international government to impose wholesale sanctions on apartheid South Africa. And it began a domino effect internationally of imposing sanctions on apartheid South Africa. So we think that is a good example of how people power can force governments to finally recognize the apartheid colonialist nature of the Israeli regime and to replicate what was done with apartheid South Africa, to dismantle that regime and to make way for a free Palestine where Muslim, Jewish people, Christian, and people of no religion can live as equals when they are freed of the apartheid colonialist regime that is the root cause of the violence and conflict that we're witnessing in Gaza and for decades in Palestine.